I've been playing JRPGs for over 30 years now, and you'd think after all that time I'd be pretty good at figuring out which games I'm going to love. As it turns out, I'm absolutely terrible at it. Some of my favorite JRPGs of all time are games I almost never played because I listened to other people instead of making up my own mind. So today, I want to talk about 10 JRPGs that I was completely wrong about. So let's start off today's list with one game that I thought was going to be painfully average. If I had told you a year ago that I'd end up genuinely recommending an Idea Factory dungeon crawler, I probably wouldn't have believed myself either. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't have anything against Idea Factory. They've put out some enjoyable games over the years. But if we're being honest, consistent masterpiece probably isn't the first phrase that comes to mind when I think about Idea Factory. Then you throw in the fact that Fia and the Wondrous Academy is a dungeon crawler, a genre I've never exactly rushed out to play, and this game already had 2 strikes against it before I had even played it. The only reason I ended up playing it at all was because I received a review code, and honestly, I expected just to play it, write my review, thank the publisher, and then move on with my life. Instead, it was totally not what I was expecting. The first thing that won me over was not the combat or the dungeons, but instead it was the characters. Fia is just ridiculously likable. She's energetic, awkward in the best way possible, and the chemistry between the cast made me genuinely look forward to the conversations between dungeon runs. Before long, I realized something. I wasn't rushing through the dialogue to get back to the gameplay. Instead, I was rushing through the dungeon because I wanted to see the next things that the characters would do. That's not something that I would expect to say. Once the combat started opening up, I realized that not all dungeon crawlers are repetitive. You don't just walk a few steps, fight enemies, and repeat. Thankfully, Mado Monogatari avoids that trap by making progression feel rewarding. Every trip into the dungeon felt like I was becoming just a little bit more powerful, learning a little bit more, and finding one more excuse to keep going. Now, is this suddenly the best game I've ever played? No. But it reminded me that sometimes I've been a little too quick to dismiss an entire genre because of a handful of experiences. If you enjoy charming characters, cozy vibes, and exploring dungeons at your own pace, I genuinely think you might like this. And considering how skeptical I was personally going in, that's probably the biggest compliment I can give it. Sometimes, one bad game can completely destroy your confidence in a series, even if it's one of your favorite series of all time. For me, that game was Star Ocean 5. I really wanted to love this game, but between the repetitive environments, the backtracking, and a story that was just very, very simplistic, I finished it wondering if maybe Star Ocean had lost whatever made the earlier games so special. So when Star Ocean The Divine Force was announced, I wasn't really as excited as I was for earlier games in the franchise. If anything, I was cautiously optimistic. I figured I'd give it a chance, but I really wasn't expecting anything. Then I actually played it, and within the first few hours, I started thinking, wait a minute, this is actually fun? The biggest reason for that was Duma and the traversal. I don't think I've ever had so much fun simply just moving around in a JRPG, flying across maps, launching yourself into combat, reaching places that looked impossible to access. It completely changed how exploration felt. Instead of running from objective marker to objective marker, I found myself constantly getting distracted. I was all, ooh, I wonder if I can get up there. 5 minutes later, I'd forgotten what I was supposed to be doing, and that's usually a sign that I'm having a great time. Combat also felt like a huge step forward from Star Ocean 5. It was fast, fluid, and it encouraged you to stay aggressive instead of just standing in one spot waiting for cooldowns. Raymond is great. He's easily my favorite character in the game. He's one of those confident without sounding obnoxious, funny, but he's not trying too hard, and he feels like someone you'd actually enjoy hanging out with. Did Star Ocean 6 completely reinvent the franchise? No. But after how disappointed I was with Star Ocean 5, it did something arguably much more important. It reminded me why I fell in love with the series in the first place. Now, I'm going to admit something that I'm not particularly proud of. For years, I let the internet decide my opinion on a game I'd never actually played. If you're a Tales fan, you've probably heard everything under the sun about Tales of the Tempest. It's the worst one. Don't bother with it. skip it. It's not worth your time. After hearing that enough times, I kind of just accepted it as fact. Why would I waste my time playing the game that everyone agreed was terrible? Then one day I stopped and thought, hang on, I've never actually played this thing. So once it got a fan translation, I started playing it. And after I finished it, I genuinely wondered if people were just making a big deal out of nothing. I'm not about to tell you Tales of the Tempest is the greatest game in the franchise, because no, it's not. It's a smaller DS title. The budget is clearly lower. And if you compare it directly to something like Symphonia, Abyss, or Eternia, yeah, it's going to come up short. But that's exactly the mistake I think people make. Instead of judging Tales of the Tempest for what it is, we feel the need to compare it to all the heavy hitters within the franchise. Once I stopped doing that, I found a genuinely enjoyable little JRPG. Like I said, it's not the greatest. The combat is okay, and it's a really short game. It's like 12 hours long. But I had fun. Sure, the battles are weird and awkward to control, and the menus are a nightmare, and the story is just way too short for you to enjoy, but I feel like the characters are actually kind of interesting. Unfortunately, they don't get enough time to really build into something more. So we have a good foundation, but the way it was created is just kind of, yeah. But anyways, sometimes a game can simply be good, and honestly, I think Tales of the Tempest deserved a lot more credit than it's received over the years. I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but every once in a while, you play a game that everyone just seems to adore, and you're just sitting there wondering if you're missing something. For me, that was Legend of Legaia. The first time I played it, I just couldn't get into it. I didn't think it was bad. In fact, I thought it was kind of a decent game, but it just felt slow. Everything about it, the battles and the pacing, even moving from town to town, it felt like the game was asking me to slow down and take my time. Meanwhile, I was sitting there and just thinking, come on, does this ever get going? So I put it down and played something else. Knowing me, it was probably like Legend of Mana or Tales of Eternia or something. And honestly, I figured that was the end of my relationship with Legend of Legaia. But then, something started happening. I started this YouTube channel, and every time I'd ask for underrated JRPG recommendations, Legend of Legaia would come up. Every time I'd ask for hidden PlayStation gems, Legend of Legaia would come up. I eventually reached a point where I thought, there has to be something with this game that I'm just not seeing. So I decided to start playing it. I wasn't going to rush. I wasn't going to compare it to other JRPGs. I was just going to let it be what it was. And somewhere along the way, I started to enjoy this game. Yeah, the combat system was still slow, but it became one of my favorite parts of the entire game. At first, you're just entering random commands and hoping something happens. Then you discover an art, then another one. Then you start wondering, what if I use the last button press of this art to start the next art? And then I have all these weird combos coming out, and the battle system finally feels interesting. It was kind of addictive trying to chain arts together and optimize my combos. And before I knew it, the combat system that almost made me quit became the reason I couldn't put the game down. It's kind of funny how our perspectives change as we get older. Nothing about The Legend of Legaia changed. I guess it was me. I stopped expecting it to play like every other JRPG I'd experienced and started appreciating exactly what made it unique. And you guys were all right. I'm so glad you all kept pestering me to play this game because this was worth it. I think Harvestella might have had one of the worst marketing problems I've ever seen, because when it was first revealed, almost everybody, including myself, looked at it and thought, oh look, Square Enix is just ripping off Stardew Valley. Now don't get me wrong, I love Stardew Valley. I like farming games, but when Square Enix announces a brand new RPG, I'm usually hoping for the typical JRPG stuff. Characters using swords, fighting monsters, and emotional storylines. You know, normal JRPG things. So more or less, I just kind of wrote Harvestella off. And then I started hearing people talk about it. Not influencers or review scores, just regular people over on a Facebook page. The more I listened, the more I kept hearing the same thing. It's actually way more of a JRPG than you might realize. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I'm really glad it did, because the farming, that's like one of the least interesting things about the game. Like, it's not even important. Don't misunderstand me, it's there. You grow crops to make money, you water your plants, all the things you'd expect from a cozy RPG. But that's never what kept me coming back. It was the whole world and the story and the job system, which is probably why I got addicted to this game, because I am down for job systems. And it was just exploring another area to see what was next. There were nights where I'd tell myself, okay, one more day and I'm going to bed. But then I'd finish that day, a story scene would trigger, and I'd unlock another objective. And suddenly, we were well past midnight, and that's usually how I know a game has me. When I just started ignoring my bedtime because I want to play more. Harvestella isn't really trying to replace Stardew Valley or Rune Factory. It's really its own little thing, and it's really hard to compare it to anything. But once I realized it was its own thing, I found a JRPG that I genuinely had a wonderful time with. Now, before we jump into the top 5, I'm curious. What's a JRPG that completely changed your mind? Maybe a game you expected to hate that became one of your favorites, or the exact opposite. Either way, let me know down in the comments because I always love hearing stories like that can add to my backlog. Now, speaking of changing your mind, the next game didn't just surprise me, it completely changed how I looked at an entire genre. If you had asked me 10 years ago if I wanted to play a visual novel, I probably would have asked, okay, but why? I like my games with gameplay. That was honestly my opinion. I thought visual novels were just endless dialogue, characters standing around and talking as you click X over and over and over again until the credits roll. Needless to say, I just didn't understand why people love them so much. Then I played Danganronpa, and almost immediately, I realized I had completely misunderstood what this game actually was. Because yes, it is a visual novel, but it's also a murder mystery. And if there's one storytelling aspect I love, it's murder mysteries. Every chapter follows this incredible rhythm. You get to know the characters, you start picking your favorites, you begin thinking, maybe everyone's actually going to make it. Then somebody dies. Now you're investigating crime scenes, looking for clues, trying to figure out who did it, how they did it, and probably most importantly, how they thought they were actually going to get away with it. It had its claws in me. Every single trial made me second guess myself. Think I had everything figured out? Then somebody would present one tiny piece of evidence that would completely destroy my theory. I love when games make me feel smart, then immediately remind me that I'm not. By the end of the game, I wasn't just a fan of Danganronpa. I had become a fan of visual novels. This had led to me playing the Zero Escape trilogy, which is by far one of my favorite stories in all of gaming, the Phoenix Wright games, and so many more. That's something I never would have predicted. Looking back now, my biggest mistake wasn't really judging Danganronpa, it was judging an entire genre I'd barely experienced. And thanks to one incredibly bizarre murder mystery, that completely changed. I think everyone has that one friend, the one that recommends the same game every single time you ask for suggestions. It doesn't matter what the conversation is about. Are you looking for a good RPG? Have you played Luffia 2? What's your favorite Super Nintendo game? Luffia 2. What should I play this weekend? Luffia 2. Eventually, you start wondering if they've been hired by somebody to push this game on everybody. And for me, as you can probably guess, that game was Luffia 2. One of my best friends talked about this game consistently. At every chance he got, he'd tell me I needed to play it. And every single time, I'd find some excuse not to. I've got too many games to play. I'll get around to it eventually. Maybe I'll play it next month. Eventually, I finally sat down and thought, okay, fine, I'll play this game. And honestly, it didn't really take all that long before I understood why he wouldn't shut up about it. Luffia 2 has that feeling. There's JRPGs that don't just feel like a game. They feel like an actual adventure. Every new town made me curious, and the dungeons felt handcrafted instead of just a bunch of random tiles thrown together. I always wanted to see what was waiting beyond the next screen. But if I had to pick the one thing that surprised me the most about Luffia 2, it had to be the puzzles. They're wonderful. Instead of simply walking through another dungeon, fighting random enemies, you're constantly interacting with the environment. Moving blocks, using tools to move those blocks, actually stopping to think about how you're going to solve the puzzle of the room. It really breaks up the pacing so well that every dungeon ends up feeling memorable. And of course, there's the story. I won't spoil anything for anyone who hasn't played it, but let's just say Luffia 2 earns every single bit of the reputation. By the time I was done the game, I remember thinking two things. First, that was incredible. I think I have a new favorite game of all time. And second, never gonna hear the end of this. Sure enough, my buddy was absolutely right about Luffia 2. If there was ever a game that taught me not to let internet opinions make up my mind for me, it's Final Fantasy XIII. This game has been argued about for well over 15 years. Some people absolutely love it, and I'm one of those people now. Others act like it's the worst Final Fantasy game ever made. And when you hear the same criticisms over and over again, you just can't help but believe them. It's just a bunch of random hallways. The combat is played auto battle. The characters are stupid and annoying. You hear those comments enough times and you almost start looking for those flaws before you even start playing. I know I did because I had heard it non-stop. The first time I played Final Fantasy 13, I liked it, but I didn't really appreciate it as much as I should have. Then years later, I decided to replay it. I wasn't expecting anything. I was just ignoring what everybody had to say about it. It was just me playing the game. And something interesting happened. I started noticing all the things I completely overlooked the first time. The complex paradigm system. Once it starts opening up, it's one of my favorite combat systems in the entire series. You make decisions like switching roles, managing the stagger, which by the way, works great in Final Fantasy 13, but stagger is one of my most hated things in the entire franchise these days. And you're always just trying to stay one step ahead instead of just mashing attack or auto battle. It's much more strategic than I originally gave it credit for. But the big thing is nowadays, this game still looks gorgeous because I don't know what it is, but Square Enix hit that note perfectly. And speaking of notes, that soundtrack is phenomenal. There are tracks in this game that still randomly pop into my head years later. Now, do I think Final Fantasy 13 is perfect? No, not even close. I completely understand why people just don't care about it in the first half of the game, and it's one huge tutorial. It's a fair criticism. But somewhere between my first and my second playthroughs, I stopped focusing on what the game wasn't and started appreciating the good aspects of it. Some games don't intimidate you because they're difficult. They intimidate you because of their reputation. That, for me, was Xenogears. For years, I'd hear people call it one of the greatest RPGs ever made. It has the greatest story in gaming history. Disc 2 is awful. But then somebody else would tell me, you have to play Xenogears before you die. Eventually, I built this game up so much in my own mind that I was actually afraid to play it. Because what if it couldn't live up to all of those expectations? Eventually, I decided it was time to find out. And that was very recently. Actually, I did review the game, so if you want to check that out after you're done here, maybe you should take a look. But now, I finally understand why people still talk about this game nearly 30 years later. The story pulled me in, admittedly kind of slowly. There's this constant feeling that something bigger is happening behind the scenes, but the thing is, every time you get some kind of answer, it raises another question, and it makes the mystery of the whole story go even deeper. And you know what? I actually love that. Some of my favorite moments in the game were just finally uncovering the truth behind the Red Rum murders, learning who Satan really was, finally obtaining Xenogear itself, and seeing the relationship between Faye and Ellie continue to develop. Those are the things that I remember about Xenogears. Now, I'd be lying if I said Xenogears was perfect. Disc 2 is exactly what people say it is, but I'll tell you right now, yeah, it could have used more development time, but I love Disc 2 much more than I did Disc 1. Some of the gear battles, I wasn't a huge fan of them, but none of those flaws stop Xenogears from becoming unforgettable. It's one of those rare RPGs that isn't just fun to play, but it's fun to think about and theorize about. Even weeks after I finished it, I found myself replaying scenes in my head, thinking about the characters, the themes, and everything that happened. To me, that's the mark of a truly special game. And let's move on to number 1, and this one is a little bit different. And it kind of hurts. Not because I went in expecting nothing, but on the contrary, it's because I went into it expecting almost everything. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you already know how much I love the Lunar series. The Silver Star story is downright fantastic. Eternal Blue is one of my favorite games of all time. They're charming, funny, heartfelt, and have this sense of adventure that's become increasingly rare over the years. So naturally, when I finally sat down to play Lunar Dragonsong, I wasn't hoping that it would just be good. I was expecting it to turn it into another favorite of mine. Instead, it became one of my biggest gaming disappointments. And it's so bad, I've reviewed it as an April Fool's joke, so that should say enough in itself. I don't enjoy making videos where I spend 10 minutes dunking on a game, because every game has its fans. And if you genuinely love Lunar Dragonsong, that's awesome. I'm glad you liked it. Unfortunately, it just never connected with me. The deeper I got into the game, the more I found myself asking one question. Why? Why does this mechanic work like this? Why am I losing HP from running in the dungeons? Why is it just not enjoyable? I feel like it's constantly fighting me instead of encouraging me to keep going. The frustrating part wasn't that I disliked it. The frustrating part was that I wanted to like it so badly. Every few hours, I'd convince myself things were about to turn around. maybe this is where it gets good. Maybe this is where it starts feeling like Lunar. But that moment never really came. Instead of getting excited to continue the adventure, I started putting it off. And that's always a bad sign. When playing a JRPG starts feeling like something you have to do instead of something you want to do, that's usually when I know something's bad. What makes Dragonsong especially disappointing is that I know what the series is capable of. I've experienced the entire franchise. I've seen just how magical it can be, which probably made this game even harder for me to accept. If this had been a completely unrelated RPG, maybe I would have walked away saying, this just wasn't for me. But because it carries the Lunar name, my expectations were naturally much higher. And maybe that's the biggest lesson that this game taught me. Expectations can work both ways. Sometimes they convince you to ignore a game that deserves your attention. Other times, they convince you a game is going to be incredible before you even start playing it. Neither is really that fair. Every game deserves a chance to stand on its own. Unfortunately, when I finally reached the end of Lunar Dragonsong, I wasn't thinking about replaying it. I really didn't want to recommend it. All it did is made me want to go play Eternal Blue again and remember what Lunar is all about. And that is probably the most honest review I can give of the game. Looking back at these 10 games, I'm kind of noticing a pattern. Almost every single time I was wrong, it had nothing to do with the game itself. It had everything to do with the expectations I carried into it. Sometimes I listened to the internet, the review scores, or judged an entire genre without giving it a chance. Or maybe one disappointing sequel convinced me that an entire series had lost its way. But sometimes I simply build a game up in my own head and realize that there's no chance it could ever live up to the impossible standard that I had created. If there's one thing this list taught me, it's this. Play the games that interest you. Not the games Twitter tells you to play, or YouTube, or Reddit. Make up your own mind. Because if I hadn't, I would have missed out on amazing games like Legend of Legaia, Harvestella, Danganronpa, Final Fantasy XIII, and more importantly, Xenogears. But now I want to hear from you. What's one JRPG you were completely wrong about? Was it something you were expecting to avoid because of what everybody said, or one that you really wanted to enjoy, but it just turned out to be butt? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more JRPG content every single week. And if you want more right now, why not check out this video where I talk about 10 of the most cultured games that I have ever played. This has been Shinky, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a wonderful day.